Now, here is what really set everything off. This conclusion was further evidenced by an instance where an employee was standing next to an FO2 and the FO2 malfunctioned and punched the refrigerator, narrowly missing the employee. The robot left a 1/4-inch deep gash in the refrigerator's stainless steel door. We have a new lawsuit to review, and it involves Figure Robotics, one of the American robotics companies that is on the frontier of building robots that will end up in factories and in our households. And this is a safety and whistleblower retaliation lawsuit. The lawsuit alleges that the whistleblower, the head of safety at Figure Robotics, escalated safety concerns to Figure's CEO, Brett Adcock, and not only were they ignored, but he was fired for escalating those concerns. Now, of course, there's always two sides to every story, but this is an interesting one because before you know it, we are going to have robots everywhere. Let me break down the lawsuit for you now. So this is a lawsuit between Robert Grundel, an individual, and Figure AI, a Delaware corporation, the defendant. Figure AI is known for their Figure robots, Figure 02, Figure 03. They are gorgeous robots on the forefront of the humanoid robot revolution that is happening right before our eyes. And this lawsuit is for wrongful termination. This whistleblower retaliation action arises from the unlawful termination of a robot safety engineer whose safety warnings presented an obstacle to defendant Figure AI. Now, this entire lawsuit is about the safety concerns raised by this safety engineer and Figure ignoring it or not taking it seriously enough. But there's this broader question of humanoid robot safety since they are going to end up in our households, as I mentioned. Figure is trying to rush a potentially dangerous humanoid robot to market. That is what the plaintiff is alleging. So first, who is Robert Grundel? He is a highly credentialed robot safety engineer. He was recruited by Figure just over a year ago, and he was recruited to lead its product safety program. He was the head of product safety at Figure Robots. And who is Figure Robots? They are developing general purpose humanoid robots for the use in the home and the workplace. Now, according to the lawsuit, Robert Grundel consistently raised safety concerns to Figure's leadership. He received strong performance feedback, meaning they said, hey, good job, you're doing really well, and then was even awarded a raise less than a year into his tenure. So basically everything was going really well. He was saying, hey, here are my safety concerns. Leadership said, great, keep up the good work. Here's a raise. But that's where the good vibes end. Now, they even, at the beginning of this lawsuit, quote Figure's mission statement as kind of proof that they care more about delivering humanoid robots to market more so than anything else, including safety. Figure's self-declared core values are move fast and be technically fearless, which reminds me a lot of Facebook's early days of move fast and break things. But obviously with humanoid robots, you can't break things, although that might be almost what happened here. And then bring a commercially viable humanoid to market. Those are Figure's core values. Now, bringing a humanoid robot to market is not really a value. That's more of a mission statement, but that's fine. Now, Robert Grundel said he warned Figure's CEO, Brett Adcock, and chief engineer, Kyle Edelberg, that Figure's humanoid robots were powerful enough to fracture a human skull and had already carved a 1/4-inch gash into a steel refrigerator door during a malfunction. And this was his main concern. These robots are incredibly powerful, but of course they need to be. They need to be able to perform at least at the human level of manipulating objects, picking up objects. And so, yeah, they are going to be powerful. Same way that humans are powerful. And then on September 2nd, 2025, offering only a vague change in business direction as the pretext, the plaintiff was fired. All right, so let's take a step back and go through the details now. Robert Grundel has over 2 decades of experience in robotics, human-robot interaction, and compliance with domestic and international safety standards. So this is a very experienced person and really the right person to think about how robots should interact with humans and the safety thereof. So Robert began his employment on October 7th, 2024, and he was actually recruited into this position. He was hired as principal robotics safety engineer and reported directly to the CEO, Brett Adcock. He was tasked with developing and enforcing Figure's global safety strategy. Now listen to this. During his first week of employment and while working on site in California, plaintiff observed that Figure had no formal safety procedures, incident reporting systems, or risk assessment processes for the robots under development. Now, that's both surprising and not surprising. When you're talking about a startup that is moving incredibly quickly, these things are getting built out as the company's getting built. But we're not talking about software here. We are talking about a humanoid robot, something that has real physical world consequences if something goes wrong. And Figure also had no dedicated employee health and safety staff, basically a team or person responsible for making sure that the employees are safe in the work environment. And of course, maybe with software, that's less of an important job, but within the context of working around incredibly high-powered robots, it is very important. The plaintiff went on to develop a safety roadmap that was approved by Brett Adcock and Edelberg. However, listen to this. Adcock and Edelberg expressed a dislike of written product requirements, which plaintiff responded to by indicating that their stance was abnormal in the field of machinery safety and of concern to him as head of product safety. That is kind of nuts to me. Expressed a dislike of written product requirements. I mean, everything is written. Everything has to be written or it didn't happen. Maybe that's the point. Robert then identified that employees needed safety training to reduce the risk of harm to employees from the robots. And so these Figure robots are incredibly powerful machines, but they are powered by the intelligence of AI. And specifically, they developed their own AI called Helix AI. And that is the AI system that powers these humanoid robots, as I said. But as we all know, if you've watched this channel for any length of time, AI is non-deterministic. It can make mistakes. And in fact, it will make mistakes. It's not really a bug, it's a feature. This is how non-deterministic systems work. And according to the lawsuit, it says AI has many risks. Traditional machine control, that's traditional code, does not, including hallucinations, unexplainable decisions, self-preservation, and apparent consciousness, which is wild to say. Now, I don't think lawyers can make this determination, to be frank. We have leading AI researchers that disagree on whether these AI models have self-preservation and are conscious. And so these discussions, these arguments are raging right now. And for the lawyers to say definitively that these are problems that AI has, I just think is a bit disingenuous, but maybe it's just very strategic. But it seems like what was happening is something that is very common in Silicon Valley. Brett Adcock and the Figure team are racing to get the first humanoid robot to market. They have tunnel vision on this mission. But again, this isn't SaaS. This isn't software. These aren't apps that they're making. They are making real world physical robots. And so there does need to be an elevated sense of caution and risk analysis. Then in January 2025, Adcock, the CEO, asked the plaintiff what it would take to put Figure robots in the home. Then Robert, the head of safety, created a safety roadmap for putting robots in the home, and then Adcock declined to attend the briefing. Believing it was critical for the CEO and safety team to be aligned, plaintiffs sent Adcock a condensed version of the requirements for his review. Adcock never responded. Now, it's not crazy to think that Adcock read it, understood it, and just didn't reply. And maybe he forgot to reply. Maybe that's not his style. But of course, there's also the take that he didn't want anything in writing. And a special thank you to Dell Technologies for sponsoring this portion of the video. Dell's Pro Max family of PCs are incredibly powerful for AI workloads. Using the new Grace Blackwell series of NVIDIA GPUs, including GB300 and GB10. These are absolute monster GPUs in your desktop. Learn more about Dell Pro Max GB10 and GB300 and the Dell Pro Max lineup of workstations with NVIDIA RTX Pro GPUs. Click the link in the description below. Let them know I sent you. Check it out. Now listen to this. This is kind of wild. Here's what the Figure team was discussing as safety precautions for having humanoid robots in the home. Plaintiff recognized that erecting guarded areas in a home to ensure that the robots would not endanger their surroundings would be impractical. Now, if that sounds a little crazy in the home, it is. But that's kind of what happens with robots in factories. There are areas in which these robots can operate that humans are not allowed, and that's very common. But of course, that doesn't work in the household because the point is to have these robots deeply integrated into our house where they can do dishes and laundry and clean and cook. And there's just no way to have an explicitly fenced off area that is only for the robots and no humans are allowed to go there. Therefore, solving the challenge of detection of objects, classifying the objects as living things, and stopping or slowing movement to prevent injury was identified by plaintiff as a key initiative for bringing figure robots to the home market. Then in May and June of 2025, the plaintiff presented a detailed safety strategy to two of Figure's investors. Now, keep this in mind. A lot of the safety guidelines were presented to investors to allay their concerns of potential safety issues. The plaintiff created a white paper that was well received by the investor and praised publicly by Brett Adcock. And the plaintiff thought this was an unchangeable plan, but only months later was significantly downgraded by Edelberg. And here's where some friction occurs. The plaintiff, Robert, the head of safety, told Edelberg, who's the chief engineer, the person who's responsible for the technical side of the business, that the investors invested because they saw the safety plan, understood it, and believed it was going to be implemented. And then it wasn't. Now, here is what really caused much concern for Robert, the head of safety. On July 28, 2025, impact testing of FO2, that is the second generation of Figure's robot, was conducted with multiple hits, and the lead engineer programmed the robot to hit at its strongest capacity. During the impact test, FO2 moved at superhuman speed, and the impact meter measured forces that were 20 times higher than the threshold of pain. These pain thresholds are defined in ISO 15066, which is, I guess, a pain threshold standard, a technical specification that provides safety requirements for collaborative industrial robot systems where humans and robots share a workspace. Now listen to this. Plaintiff estimated the force generated by FO2 to be approximately more than twice the force necessary to fracture an adult human skull. So these robots, yes, in the right circumstance, are dangerous. But, and this is a big but, tools are dangerous. And I want to touch on this notion for a minute. When you drive a car, when you use a hammer, when you use a table saw, if you use a blender, all of these things have risks to them. There are countless examples of people getting injured, obviously with cars, but with many other household items. And this is the trade-off. This isn't to say, okay, just because a humanoid robot can injure you, that it will injure you. And look, in the universe of possibilities, even if it will injure someone, there needs to be a trade-off discussion. What is the value? What is the total positive impact versus what is the downside? And that discussion must be had. Obviously, I have mentioned multiple times on the channel that I am totally fine having a robot in my household. I obviously want plenty of safety testing done to it. I will take all of the safety precautions possible, just like I would with any other dangerous tool that I use. But again, to think that just because these things can be dangerous, that we shouldn't use them, or that their capabilities should be reduced greatly to the point that they're not even useful anymore, that is where I disagree wholeheartedly. It is a risk-reward calculation just like anything else. Okay, so let's keep going. On July 29, 2025, Vice President of Growth Lee Randaccio contacted the plaintiff and let him know he was given a raise of $10,000 or a 5.2% raise under a year of work. Typically, you usually get some kind of performance feedback right around a year of employment. And so getting a raise before the year is usually a good sign. Then after seeing the impact test from the robot, the plaintiff sent a Slack communication to Brett Adcock informing him that the robot was capable of inflicting severe permanent injury on humans. Plaintiff message was ignored. And it's not just when these humanoid robots get delivered to the house that the head of safety was nervous. It was also about the employees at Figure who were testing the robot and who were in close proximity with the robot every day, all day. So it continues, because there had been no EHS on site, so somebody responsible for employee safety, Figure employees had begun expressing their safety concerns directly to plaintiff. And there were many near misses occurring, but not being tracked. Near misses meaning an employee had a near miss where the robot almost hurt them, but that was not being tracked. Now, here is what really set everything off. This conclusion was further evidenced by an instance where an employee was standing next to an FO2 and the FO2 malfunctioned and punched the refrigerator, nearly missing the employee. The robot left a 1/4 inch deep gash in the refrigerator's stainless steel door. Imagine seeing that. It would definitely be frightening. These robots are incredibly powerful. So they started talking about an e-stop mechanism, emergency stop. And it is exactly what it sounds like. This is essentially a button you can press to immediately stop the robot, which makes a ton of sense to me. But Figure leadership decided to stop the e-stop program. Listen to this. On or about August 11, 2025, plaintiff was informed that Edelberg was ending a project to certify an e-stop function. The process of certification proves that the e-stop, a critical risk reduction measure when a robot is run by a safety observer, is sufficiently reliable to prevent risk to personnel. Now, here is something interesting. A safety observer, what does that mean? Does that mean there's always going to be somebody watching? Does that mean these robots are going to be teleoperated at the beginning? And again, investors had been sold on the e-stop. And so the plaintiff continued to write his concerns down in writing. And so 2 employees within the commercial department, that's the team that sells the robots, who had received the email, approached plaintiff and expressed alarm that he had put his concerns in writing in an email. Then on August 15th, the plaintiff, the head of safety, emailed and Slack messaged Edelberg and Adcock to see if they had any questions about the notes that he had been sending, his concerns about the safety. The plaintiff reiterated that the current e-stop was not sufficient with respect to employee safety. Now, here's the crazy part. The safety feature, the e-stop of FO2, had been removed without his knowledge because the principal engineer did not like the aesthetic appearance of the safety feature. They basically thought it looked ugly. And then while the plaintiff was on site, he asked Adcock to meet, and he asked Adcock if he had any more questions or follow-ups, and Adcock said he was too busy to meet with the head of safety. Then Adcock had slowly disengaged in safety discussions by decreasing their weekly meetings to bi-weekly, then monthly, then quarterly meetings, and eventually stopped replying altogether to many of plaintiff's messages. So Robert, the head of safety, was emailing, messaging, talking to Brett Adcock, and trying to escalate concerns, and Brett Adcock eventually just said, "I'm done. I don't want to hear about it." Now, of course, all of this is alleged. There's always 2 sides of the story. I really want to be clear about that. Then, finally, on September 2nd, 2025, just 4 days after emphasizing the robot's high risk to employees during a safety training meeting, and only weeks after his most detailed written complaint about certification cancellations and danger the robots posed to employees and customers, plaintiff was summoned to a surprise meeting with Rendacio and informed that his employment was terminated immediately due to a change in business direction related to Figure's targeting of the home market. So the plaintiff believes he was wrongly terminated because he kept escalating safety concerns, and they didn't want to hear it anymore. And as I said before, we are on this inevitable trajectory to get humanoid robots in the home, and I'm here for it. I really want to see it happen. But of course, there are safety concerns. These robots are not toys. They are not autonomous vacuums. For example, these are very tall, very powerful robots that if something goes wrong, they can really hurt somebody. But again, I compare that to other tools that we find in our house. And as always, it is a risk-reward discussion. That is my position. We need to see what are the potential benefits of having humanoid robots in the household, and what are the potential risks. Let's try to mitigate the risks as much as possible, but let's not mitigate them so much to the point where these robots become useless. So we'll see what ends up happening with this lawsuit. I find it fascinating. Hopefully you did too. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.